Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Rehash, a Web3 podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and on this episode, we're speaking with Jonny Mack, co-founder and CEO of Hypersub and Fabric, about all things subscriptions. Before we dive into all of that, I am super excited to announce that Rehash has just launched a Hypersub, or a monthly subscription, that will deliver all of our podcast episodes straight to your wallet on-chain. You can find the link to it in the show notes or hop into our Telegram group at t.me/rehashweb3 if you're running into any issues with that at all. So in this episode, Jonny and I talk about all things subscriptions and Hypersub, what features Web3 enables for creator subscriptions that was never before possible in Web2, how creators can best engage their audience to encourage resubscribes and reduce churn, and some of the best examples of how creators have been using Hypersub to date. If you are a creator of any kind, an artist, musician, podcaster, video creator, freelancer, or even developer, I think you'll really enjoy listening to this episode and find lots of inspiration from it. Don't forget to subscribe to our Hypersub and check out other awesome Hypersubs at hypersub.xyz. Jonny was nominated by Triumph and voted onto the podcast by Triumph, Nick Naragi, Aaron Soskin, Tim Black, Meg Lister, and myself, Diana Chen. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Jonny Mack. Jonny Mack, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad we're making this happen. I know you missed the cutoff technically in our on-chain votes by 10 votes, which I think came out to like 0.00005% of all votes cast or something. So it's very, very minimal. And I've never had this happen where somebody missed the cutoff. And I've gotten so many DMs from people in the Rehash community about wanting to get you on. So
Nice.
People were actually upset that you missed the cutoff. Like, people really wanted to get you on. If you look at the votes, a bunch of people cast votes for you. So the demand clearly is there. So I was like, all right, whatever. Let's just bring them on. We can have an extra episode this season.
I really appreciate it. And that's so awesome to hear. So thank you to everyone who voted for me. Let's fucking go.
Of course. Yes, that's the joy of having a decentralized system, but not fully decentralized, right? We got to leave room for people, for things like this to happen. Otherwise, we wouldn't have you on the podcast, and that would be a huge shame. So Jonny from Hypersub and Fabric, before we get into all of that, I actually want to start by announcing something super exciting, which is that Rehash is now on Hypersub. What that means essentially is, we'll dive deeper into all of this, but the TLDR is, I've heard you say before, keep it simple. Use Hypersub in a way that integrates into your current stack instead of trying to reinvent something new or adding new content to the mix or new things that you have to do. So really what we did was we basically created a Hypersub that is a Rehash delivery service, in short. And so if you sign up for this monthly subscription on Hypersub, you will get every podcast episode delivered straight to your wallet on chain without having to do anything. So right now, people have to go to pods.media/rehash to collect each episode. It's not that that's a difficult thing, but sometimes people forget, or they're traveling, they're mobile, they don't have their ledger with them, they can't connect wallet. So no worries with this subscription service. We will send that NFT straight to your wallet. You have to do absolutely nothing, and you have it in your wallet. So definitely go and check out the Hypersub. We've already airdropped month or two free subscription to some of our top supporters. So if you supported us in our original Mirror crowdfund from way back in April of 2022, if you were one of our top contributors there, so if you contributed 0.5 ETH or higher, you've received 2 free months of the Rehash Hypersub. So you're already subscribed. If you are one of our top 10 collectors on Pods, you've also received 2 free months of Hypersub subscription. And then if you were a past guest or a past sponsor of the podcast, you've received 1 free month for each time you appeared on the podcast or each time you sponsored the podcast. And all of this is cumulative. So if you were an early supporter on Mirror, plus you were a guest on the podcast, plus maybe you sponsored the podcast, plus you're a top collector, I mean, you could get up to, I think, 5 or 6 or even more free months on Hypersub. So check your wallets. That's already been dropped by the time you're hearing this episode. And actually, if you're tuning in live too, you're getting the alpha before we announce to the public. So you should already have that in your wallet. You should be able to see that already if that's been airdropped to you. If not, you can go ahead on to Hypersub and subscribe and be one of our early subscribers. I know Jonny got that #1 subscriber title already. It's kind of a bit of a cheat since he runs the platform and he sees everything that comes through. But I did see that pop up on my Warpcast, actually, that you had subscribed to us. So that's a pretty cool feature as well. So now that I have said all of that, you guys can go check out Rehash on Hypersub. Let's get into what actually is Hypersub and what all of that entails. So everything I said makes a little bit more sense. So to start off, why don't you just give us like the high level rundown of what Hypersub is? And I'm curious too, how you got this idea for a subscription-based service that runs on chain.
I loved that intro. I mean, I feel like that explanation and how you guys are using Hypersub for Rehash, it's like very simple, easy to understand. It's perfect. So I'm going to listen back to this and take some notes from your opening. The basic idea of what Hypersub is, it's like an NFT with a clock. So when you mint a Hypersub NFT, what you're actually doing is you're minting time on chain. And then the creator of that NFT can use that positive balance of time to in lots of different ways, you know? So the way that we've seen, I think about 7 use cases emerge, which would be art, memberships, writing, podcasts, music, apps, and freelance. So in all those cases, what's happening is you have people who mint time on the Hypersub NFT, and then that positive balance of time grants them access to perks and benefits. And that might include having art or media like music, writing, podcasts, etc., airdrop to your wallet on some recurring cadence. It might be discounts on physical products, on IRL experiences. For freelancers, it would be their time. You're literally minting their time in exchange for having them do like bespoke work for you or your company. For app developers, that positive balance of time, they might gate access to premium features. So fundamentally, Hypersub is really like a payment rail. It's an on-chain payment system. And because the time itself is on-chain, and it's decrementing every second, in order to maintain that access or maintain, you know, those perks and benefits, you have to keep putting money into the contract on a recurring basis. And so in this way, you have a kind of recurring funding model that's on chain, and that kind of uses the NFT primitive. So there's not, you know, this complicated series of having to stake and stream and set up all this stuff. It's literally just like mint an NFT. So that's kind of like what it is and how people have been using it. As much as I'd love to claim credit for the idea, this is not a new idea, actually. There have been multiple EIPs for subscription NFTs going back years. And so I will say, like, we did have the idea independently, and we're like, thought we were geniuses. And then we went and looked and we're like, nope, just like many good ideas, they kind of occur in the minds of many at the same time. And so we're like, okay, that was actually very encouraging to us, because we're like, oh, cool. Like, this is an idea that's been sloshing around in the ecosystem for a while, but really hasn't gotten a lot of developer adoption. And our view, when we looked at these EIPs, and, you know, the EF kind of had marked them saying, don't use them. They didn't, you know, they're not ready. They didn't get there as far as marshaling the community support. We were like, that's okay. We can still just do it. You know, we can still just write these contracts and build a protocol and build a user-friendly client on top of it that does it and see if it works. And so that's what we did. And it's been going great. You know, I think there's a couple things we're doing differently than just, you know, there's some novel mechanisms for kind of moving value around. So it's not, you know, just a subscription NFT. You know, I think it's starting to get some traction. It's starting to click for people. Yeah, that's kind of how we had the idea. I think the last thing I'll say on that is that if you look at the way people have been using NFTs, many of them, it's discrete mints. But for a lot of people, they have been trying to kind of mold them into this membership model. So there's been people saying, mint this NFT for this season, you know, or people are trying to get people their audience to mint many NFTs. And so our view was, okay, Web3 needs recurring payment model. You know, this is what powers, you know, billion-dollar businesses. And I think this is the sign of like a mature industry, is that there's money that's flowing. You know, it's not just these one-off discrete purchases. Yeah, that was kind of the initial thinking and how it started.
I've heard people compare Hypersub to Patreon. I think that was actually one of the questions we got from Twitter too. I think from Tim, was what is the difference between Hypersub and Patreon? And I wanted to talk to you more broadly too about just the differences between subscription models in the Web 2 space and the traditional space versus now moving things on chain. And, going to your point about like, we need to show that more ways in which Web3 is mature, or at least maturing and getting there, and recurring payments is one of them. Showing that money is flowing is one of the ways. And I think like within this Web3 space, we often have this discourse about how Web3 is so beneficial to creators. It can help creators make more money, things like that. And I think this is one of the best ways I've seen so far about putting our money where our mouth is, and actually like not just saying that this is a thing that can happen in theory, but that this is actually a thing that is happening in practice, and showing people, starting to build out that playbook. Artists that are listening to this, creators, podcasters, video creators, like any of these people can also make a lot of money doing something like this. But anyway, back to, the differences between Web 2 subscription service like Patreon versus Web3, like Hypersub, like what does that on-chain element bring to subscription?
Practically, from a product perspective, there's a material difference between, Hypersub and Patreon. And that is the fact that you can share your revenue with your subscribers. So when you subscribe on Patreon, that's essentially a recurring transfer of value from consumer to creator. That's it. That's the end of relationship. The way that Hypersub works is that we have this property of the protocol that powers Hypersub, which we call subscriber rewards. And it's essentially percentage of the revenue that the creator has the option to allocate into a pool, into an on-chain pool, wherein the earlier you subscribe and the longer period of time you subscribe for, the more ownership of that pool you have. So what that looks like is, let's say a creator says, sure, I'll share 10% of my Hypersub revenue with subscribers themselves. That means that for every $100 of subscription revenue that flows in, $10 is going to get siphoned off and put into this on-chain pool. The question then becomes, whose $10 is that? How do you get access to that? And the answer is that the earlier subscribers who've made a long-term bet get the lion's share of that $10. So for someone who subscribes in like month 1 for like a year, they're going to get a lot more shares in that reward pool than someone who subscribes in like month 12 for 1 month. And the thesis here is that your early supporters actually have an outsized impact on your success as a creator, and thus should have an outsized reward. And so this is hard-coded in V1 of the protocol. We have V2 launching on the 21st, which will make the curve there configurable. But essentially the way that it works is that you get a multiplier on the shares in the first month, and then that halves every month for 8 months. So that's the way it works today. It's a hard-coded curve. We had to make constraints when we were building it. We're just like, okay, we're going to just make these decisions. This is just how it works. In V2, that'll be configurable. So the creator will essentially be able to decide, what does it mean to be early? What does it mean to be late? That's up to them. And so it aligns incentives. That was the kind of thinking here, which is like, look, the people that were earliest and made the biggest long-term bet on you, you can cut them into your upside. They can share in your success. And so obviously you can't do that on Patreon. You can't really do that on any Web2 platform because of the limitation of Web2 payments. I think one of the powerful things about crypto is that it's programmable value. So you can move money. It allows us to do these kind of fun incentive aligning things. So that's like the first big difference. We also have referral rewards, which is that, again, the creator has the option to allocate a percentage of the subscription purchase to the person who referred a subscriber. So you could say it's 2%, 10%, 20%. It's up to you. 0 if you want. And that way, let's say you say it's 10 and I refer someone who mints $100 worth of time, I just got $10. So I'm getting rewarded proportional to the value that I'm creating, for the creator. So those are pretty different. And that's on a product perspective. I think from the protocol perspective, the real big difference is that with Patreon and really with any Web2 membership platform, whether it's Substack or, whatever, there's a lot of them. The membership credential itself is private. It's in a database. Then the balance of time or the commitment that a subscriber has made is also private and in a database. So like one analogy for thinking about this is like, when you go to New York City and you buy an MTA card and you put money on that card, it gets you access to all the trains in New York City, but only New York City. If you go to London or Tokyo or Mexico City, that card won't work. This is the Web 2 world, right? I create an economic relationship with a writer on Substack. That relationship is siloed to Substack. Same thing in Patreon, same thing in YouTube, same, and so on and so forth. What we're doing in Web 3, and I think what everyone who's understands the space can see, is that we're building on this universal computer, this universal kind of substrate. And so I think the reason why a lot of savvy creators really like Hypersub is because it works everywhere. It's the universal access pass is what I like to call it. So the analogy here is that imagine if you could buy a subway card in New York, you put $20 on it, you go to London, it works in London. You can ride all the trains in London. You go to Tokyo, you can ride all the trains in Tokyo, so on and so forth, right? The analogy here is that these different geographic regions are kind of like different internet regions. And so the value of the Hypersub NFT is that it works anywhere. You see people doing airdrops with pods, with Zora, with Highlight. You see them writing on Paragraph, doing discounts on physical products. Like it just works everywhere. And so it makes it easy to imbue the membership with ever more value because it's just this like interoperable thing. So like that's kind of how we're differentiated, I think, with underlying tech, like with, that's what we get by building Onchain and by building a protocol. And I'll say it's a big risk. It's a big bet, like, will the world adopt an on-chain computer? Like, will all systems eventually migrate to this universal substrate? I certainly hope so. That's the bet that we're making. There are formidable forces who like don't want that. That's not in their best interest. Like I think that the more that people do this, that's like bad for these big Web 2 silos. So that's our belief. That's our thesis. And so that's what we're doing. That's my current kind of explanation for how it's different.
Kind of as a side note here, do you think that Web3 businesses can make as much or more money by taking a platform fee as these Web2 businesses can in the way that they're operating now?
I think my answer to this would be that for a little while, yes. But I think that if by Web3 business you mean client and protocol, if the protocol is open, then you are subjected to the competitive pressure of the market. So for example, let's say that Hypersub just keeps growing and we do really well. We take 4% fee. STP, which is the protocol that we built that powers Hypersub, that takes a 1% fee. So there's a big opportunity there for a competitor to come along and just undercut us and say, well, we'll provide all the same stuff and we'll do it for 3%. And then maybe someone else comes along, does it for 2 and 1 and just race to the bottom. So like it could be that for a little while, as we grow, it's like shooting fish in a barrel and we can, make a lot of money. But on a long enough time scale, like if it's the protocol that anyone can build on, what's our moat? How are we differentiated from competitors within our space? I think that's an open question. I think it's possible if you're differentiated enough, but I don't know. That's a good question. I really don't know. I mean, can a Web3 business have like become a dominant player like Spotify or, Substack? Like maybe they can, but maybe because the infrastructure is open and anyone can compete, maybe it'll be much harder for them to do that.
Yeah, no, that's true. So STP, which is the subscription token protocol, that is the part that's open source and that anybody can build on.
That's right. Yeah. So that's on chain. There's an open source SDK. There's docs. V2 comes out end of this month. Again, anyone can build on it. It takes a 1% fee. So our philosophy is that protocols want to be free. And so V1 of the protocol takes 4%. V2 will take 1%. I think V3 will, take even less. And eventually, I think it needs to trend towards 0 because once it's in a good place, like once it's not getting as many updates and it's like pretty stable, then you kind of have to ask this question, like, why is anyone paying the fee? Like the answer today is because there's work being done on it. So that work is being compensated in the form of the fee. Like we've had to spend tens of thousands of dollars on audit and, hundreds and hundreds of hours of engineering time. And so when you pay a fee, like that's effectively what you're paying for. But as that workload trends towards 0, I think the fee needs to as well. So then it just becomes purely client play. Like, okay, the infrastructure, it's just like web infrastructure. It's like email, protocols. It's like protocol is effectively table stakes. So it's up to the client to differentiate.
Compared to most of my friends in Web3, I'm not the most online person. And with how fast things move in this space, it can be really challenging to keep up with the newest projects and what's trending. That's why I love Forage, a community-curated front page for launches shaping on-chain culture. A Forage launch page combines a press release and a commemorative mint into a sleek single page where they garner support in the form of mint. Projects receiving more mints are bumped to the top of the page, which means I can finally stop doom scrolling or worrying about missing an important launch and simply check Forage to stay up to date on what's happening on-chain. And as an added bonus, Forage uses protocol rewards, so supporters receive a referral reward each time someone mints through their referral link. Go to forage.xyz to get started today. Okay, so back to what we were talking about before, Web2 versus Web3 subscriptions. It sounds like the main features that Web3 provides are, first of all, that ability to revenue split with your fans and your followers. And then secondly, the ability for the creator or the owner of that subscription to be able to actually own their members list and not have to be subject to the platform itself. If they wanted to take that out of Hypersub and go do something else with it, they absolutely could. They could go and host an event and invite all of these people to their in-person event. It has nothing to do with Hypersub, and they could do that. Could you kind of give us an idea of some of the other ways in which people can use Hypersub and the things that you believe are most effective or best to actually put behind a pay gate? And maybe we can categorize these into certain categories. So I would say like the way that Rehash is using it is we're kind of like people are paying for convenience, essentially, right? Like the convenience of not having to go to pods and mint each episode, having to remember to do that week after week. They get it automatically dropped to their wallet. So they're paying for convenience. What are other things that people have and you believe will continue to want to pay money for, and that you believe should be is good or is fine to put behind a paywall?
I think you hit the nail squarely on the head. Like convenience, that's a huge one. So like Xerox Designer has one called the Paperboy. He's been doing these daily design every days for, I think he's at over 500 consecutive days, like, and you can mint them all. And I think he's like ahead of his time. I think that collection is amazing, and it's a huge pain in the ass to try to chase that down every day and mint it. So being able to subscribe is really nice because it just shows up in your wallet every day. Now, that's not gated. It's very similar to what you guys are doing, right? With Rehash. It's like, I think if you're creating media, you want as big of a megaphone and as much distribution as you can possibly get. I don't think it makes sense to gate media. So gating live streams, gating writing, gating other forms of media, I think is probably a bad idea, because what all creators want more of is distribution. You can never have enough of it. Even the people that are like huge, they have like millions of followers, they want more. So distribution, I think, is really good. And I think like not something that you should use Hypersub to gate, unless you're trying to build something small and that's a community. So there's a couple creators on Hypersub that I think represent the kind of tip of the spear of like a Web3 native creator. So like there's a great blog post that Jared from USV wrote about the skeuomorphic era. And he's like, a lot of what we're seeing in crypto is like skeuomorphic, which is fine. That's a good start. You kind of need that so that people can latch onto it and be like, oh, I get it. It's like Web3 Patreon. But that's probably not where this is all going to go. So when I look at people using Hypersub for distribution and for convenience, it's like, okay, that's easy thing to understand, but it's probably not what will evolve to. So there's like, when I look at Proxy Studio, Terminally Onchain, Believe in Something, and Club TED, those are 4 creators that I think they're doing, I don't even know how to categorize them. Like they're building software, they're creating communities, they're creating media, but a lot of it is gated to their community. And they're kind of building like a small culture. And then they're using the money that they get to bootstrap IRL experiences, software projects, and then they're sharing in the upside. They're sharing with their subscribers. And so I'm like, whoa, I don't even know, it breaks my brain. Like, I'm like, well, what do you call this? I'm like, I don't really know. It almost in some ways feels like the next evolution of like a DAO or something, where it's like very community driven, but at the same time, there's like a clear individual at the helm who's like responsible for decision making, but it's not they don't ignore the community, but the community isn't the one doing everything. It's this kind of like synthesis. I would love to see more of that. I would love to see more people start to play with that approach to just, I think there's something really novel and exciting kind of emerging on that frontier. So that's an interesting use case. But yeah, I think like what I said, I mean, I think for artists, that's kind of our bread and butter right now. It's like artists who do great work, who have a community of collectors who want to collect that work and don't have to put forward a bunch of effort to do it. They just want to kind of set and forget. So like Prohibition just did this. They just had a thing. I think they capped it to like 200. It sold out pretty fast. Actually, I think yesterday it sold out. So it's like less than a week. It's just collect on autopilot is basically the model, which I think is great. I do it for a bunch and I love seeing stuff just trickle into my wallet every day.
Yeah, I do think it'll be really interesting to see how people come up with new and innovative ways of using it. I think the way we're using it, at least to start out, is pretty straightforward and it is pretty skeuomorphic and it's not super innovative. But certainly if it goes well and people are really into it, like there's so much room for us to continue to develop. And this is funny too. People are already dropping the referral links to the Rehash Hypersub in the live stream chat and trying to get some referral off of that. So you mentioned before with the ability of having on-chain subscriptions, creators having the ability to do revenue splits with their fans and followers. So with Rehash, if you refer somebody, you get 10% of that. That's what we have built in. Initial pool you were talking about, where a percentage of all the proceeds go into this pool that gets split back to all of the subscribers. We have that set to 15%. So 15% of all of our revenue will be going into this pool. So shout out Rachel in the chat for dropping her referral link already and starting to show. We love to see it. Obviously, the first step for people who are wanting to build a following, wanting to make money from being a creator, is to get people to subscribe. That is the big first step. But once you get people to subscribe, there's kind of this other hurdle you go through, which is keeping people engaged and getting people to resubscribe. And I wonder from what you think about this, do you think it's actually harder to get people to resubscribe, or do you think it's easier? And this is, given the way it's structured now without that like credit card payment on auto subscribe. So assuming we don't have that, do you think it's easier or harder to get people to subscribe in the first place versus to renew their subscription once it expires?
So we will have monthly recurring credit card payments. That is something that we've been working on. V2, we had to do a big upgrade to the protocol to facilitate it in the way that we wanted to do it. And so that is coming. But yeah, like because we made the conscious decision not to use allowances and instead to do essentially their prepayments. So we frame this as subscriptions, but it functions more kind of like a gift card, where you put money on, you essentially buy time. The time grants you access. The time passes. You have to keep buying more time. I've been thinking about this as like a bad thing, but I think people actually kind of like it, because the thing with like credit card subscriptions, and what I think people don't like, is that you set it and then you forget it, and then you look back and you're like, oh, I've spent hundreds of dollars on this thing. I didn't actually want to do that, but you forget. So there's something it's very favorable, I think, to the end user that you just buy whatever you feel comfortable buying, and that's the time you have. And so it doesn't just run forever. I think that both are really hard, and they're hard in different ways. So I think like getting people to subscribe is really, really, really hard. What I've seen be successful is people who are super active within a community. It could be on Twitter, it could be on Farcaster, it could be in Discord, wherever though, but you need to be engaging people on a regular basis with the creative work that you're doing in order for them to care about you at all. There's been really amazing people who do awesome work. They go to, and they maybe have a big following on Instagram. They have like 50,000 followers on Instagram. They post there all the time, a lot of engagement there. They maybe come to Farcaster for like, a couple weeks or something. They don't really post a lot. They do a Hypersub. It goes nowhere. And then they're like, oh, it didn't really work. I'm like, well, it didn't work because we're not yet big enough to drive distribution. You can't just I can't just put you on the homepage of Hypersub and then have you expect it to like rip. We're not YouTube. So in order for this to work, like you have to engage your existing community. And so I think like that's hard. Building an authentic community is hard ass work. Once you've done that, I think getting people to subscribe is easier, like actually a lot easier. Then this question of resubscribe, to me, this comes squarely down to, are you providing outsized value? So like I think about That's what this all comes down to. It's like people have to feel like they're getting more for less. If I feel like at the end of whatever period I've subscribed for, whether it's a month or a year, I'm like, damn, that was amazing, actually. Like I met really incredible people. I have authentic interactions with them, IRL, URL. I've got a bunch of interesting media and access to things. Like, is this worth, $100 a year? Or is this worth, whatever I'm paying? Like, yes, it is. Okay, I'm going to resubscribe. If not, then I think, people don't. It's funny. Like I'm a big fan of the Acquired podcast. And I think the episode on Costco is like fascinating with regard to like membership dynamics. And their whole thing is like create outsized member benefit. Like don't charge as much money as you could on the physical products that you sell, because if you do, you're kind of biting into the value of the membership. And so instead, imbue that membership with as much value as you possibly can so that people stay subscribed. They don't churn. I think that we're doing memberships in this novel way. We're doing it on chain. We're sharing value. But I think there's a lot of stuff that like doesn't change. It's like that great Bezos quote where he's like, people ask us how the future will be different in 10 years. And we ask what's not going to change in 10 years, like what'll be the same. And I think that like membership dynamics and subscription dynamics are pretty consistent. How you do it changes, but like at the end of the day, people really do have to feel like they're getting more value than they're paying for in order to continue paying into the system. That's my current thinking. So I think for resubscribing, it's like, yeah, like engage your community, provide outsized value, and people will stay. And we see that, like some creators have really high churn rates and some have really low churn rates. And I think that's proportional to the work they put in.
I'm curious, do you think value deteriorates over time? Like, do you think that someone could find a subscription to be valuable in the beginning, but then over time, they kind of just get bored of it if there's no innovation? Like, do you think creators have to keep innovating and adding things in order to keep that value? Or do you think if the value is there from the start, if there's outsized value from the start, then there's outsized value in 1 year, in 2 years down the line, it's still there?
I think you probably do have to innovate, and do new things and keep people engaged. I mean, or at least maybe if what you're doing is the same, maybe you're dropping art or creating media. I think this is true too, just with creative careers in general. Like I think you can look at bands, and it's like people like the bands that constantly are like iterating and doing new things. And people, I think, get bored with the bands that they can just tell are kind of phoning it in. And so, yeah, I think it is possible that value can deteriorate, and that if someone's phoning it in and not really pushing the limits, I could see people just being like, this just feels kind of stuck and boring and uninspired, and I'm probably not going to stick around. In some ways, we could look at the last cycle of crypto and we kind of see that. There was all this excitement with 10,000 PFP projects and discords, and like the meta really shifted. And anyone still trying to play that game, I think, is kind of on the struggle bus. Things move forward and you got to stay relevant and continue to push the limits. I think that's what people sign up for, is they want to be on that journey with you. So if you're not really walking forward anymore, I think people probably will just peace out.
What about with a lot of creators, especially content creators like writers or even podcasters or even video creators? Like we talked about before, media should not be paywall gated for the most part because you want that distribution. So for people who are creating primarily this form of media that's typically free for people to view, what are some ways in which they can provide outsized value to their community? Since it's not so straightforward as like, Costco, like you go buy a roll of paper towels and it normally costs this and you give it at a discount. Or, with artists, like I think it's more straightforward. Like they maybe sell all their pieces at like 0.1 ETH per piece. And with the subscription, you get, one drop per month and it's less than that. Like the math is really straightforward. I think with a lot of content creators who are providing primarily free value in the first place, it's harder to know what type of value is considered outsized value.
Access. So like access to the creator via like, a group chat or private channels. I think that access kind of results in engagement. And I think that's mutually beneficial. I think it's really like, there's something really powerful for a creator to be like, okay, I have this digital space for me and my biggest fans. And I know they're my biggest fans because they're paying. They're paying for what even though I'm offering this for free and they don't have to pay, they are paying. So that's a super, super strong signal that they're with me. And so I think engaging there is mutually beneficial, and it's a benefit. It's a perk. So access, engagement, and then I think process, so sharing your process. So this is something I think some of the artists on Hypersub do really well, which is they'll share, sketches, they'll share ideas. They're like providing a glimpse into the process. This is, if you look at the top Patreon creators, this is basically Patreon's bread and butter. It's like mostly podcasts, and it's mostly stuff like what you're doing now, where it's like, okay, here's some, B-sides and extras, the live stream, you can ask questions, it's like you're getting an insight into kind of additional content and process that non-subscribers don't get. So I think for the really diehard fans, I think that's all hugely valuable, and how you would kind of have a differentiated offering between, okay, here's my published media, and then here's my kind of subscriber only offering.
Do you have any final thoughts on Hypersub or on anything we've discussed before we sort of wrap up here? I'm going to jump to a couple of fun Twitter questions and then end with Can You Not, which I do with every guest this season.
Cool. Let's do it. Let's jump in.
Okay, cool. So hopefully you've got a Can You Not prepared, but if not, I'll give you a little time to think about it. I'm going to jump to a couple of fun Twitter questions first. The first one I have is from Rehash. He said, you are meeting a new person for the first time and they casually express an interest in guitar music. What are you playing for them?
I saw this.
Do you play guitar, by the way? Is this okay.
Well, we have a group chat with all the metalheads and hardcore kids, all the aging hardcore kids on Farcasters. So if that's you, hit me up. I'll add you to it. We like to share music recommendations. But guitar music.
Is Andy Boyan in that group yet?
I don't think so. Let's get him in there.
He's like the biggest metalhead I know. Yeah. Andy, if you're listening to this, go hit up Jonny.
So with guitar music, that you could be interpreted in a couple different ways. The way I hear that is I hear that in two ways. So I would hear Leo Kottke and John Fahey, acoustic guitar, instrumental music from the 70s, finger picking guitar. That's probably where I'd start. I'd be like, okay, here's a Leo Kottke record. Here's John Fahey. Start there. And I would then maybe do you want to go forward or backward? If you want to go backward, maybe it would be blues music, like folk blues music. And then forwards, it would probably start getting into metal. So I've been on a Gatecreeper kick lately, which is pretty guitar driven music. So I'd probably start looking at death metal, black metal, really guitar forward stuff like that. That's what I give them.
Nice.
And then I'd probably never talk to him again because those are the most obscure, inaccessible references. But that's what I'd start with.
You'd either never speak again or you'd be BFFs.
Exactly. And that's how I roll. Actually, I really like being like that. Very polarizing. You love me or hate me.
All right. And then the other question I have is from Tim Black. He said, why do you have such banger memes? And tell a story about the memes channel management on Farcaster.
Okay. So the story with memes is when I joined Farcaster, it was really early. There was not a lot of people there. And I just had my first kid. And literally my wife and I became the meme. We would get our kid to bed and we were exhausted. And then we would sit on the couch and literally just send each other memes and fucking crack up in silence. And that was our way to just decompress at the end of the day. I was okay, well, I just joined Farcaster and I really liked that it was kind of small and irreverent. And I would post stuff that I probably would never post on Twitter. Just funny, kind of anti-government memes or just kind of edgy stuff. So I was I'll just put it here. That just became my thing. I was my wife would send me funny memes or I'd find funny memes. Other people would send me memes and I would just put them on Farcaster. And then it just started, it kind of grew and steamrolled and became a thing. And now the memes channel has 240,000 followers and a ton of engagement. And so with the channel subscription, as Farcaster channels have become decentralized and now they have owners and you can kind of gate access and do all this interesting composable stuff. The experiment that I'm currently running is that you can pay about $1 a month in ETH to subscribe. And if you do, your meme will show up in the main feed. And what I'm doing with the revenue is I'm splitting it 96-4. So I'm taking 4% personally to do moderation. 96% flows into memeschannel.eth, which is a tipping pool that I then use Paybot, which is a tool on Farcaster And so I just tip the memes. I tip all the banger memes. And so the economics of it is that it's 0.0042069 ETH, it's about $15 to subscribe. That's an annual subscription. That's also the tip amount. So when I tip people, I tip 0.0042069. So the idea here is that if you cast a banger, you get your entire year paid for. And if you cast 2, you can start making money. And my joke is that it's essentially a transfer of value from the non-dank to the dank.
What percentage of memes on there get tipped?
I think I've tipped about 20 so far. So it's maybe $300 or so. Percentage wise, it would be low because there's a lot of casts. So typically what I'll look at is what's getting 100, 150 likes, from accounts that, are not spam, what has a lot of replies, like what's kind of, like an obvious banger. Those are the ones that I'm tipping, and I keep track of it. And so what I just sent out a couple of days ago is the monthly memes report. And so the idea here is that every month I'm going to track the stats. So I use a couple tools for tracking total casts, total engagement, track all that, track the revenue, and then track the money that's been tipped out. And because it's all on chain, it's all verifiable. You don't have to take my word for it. So that'll get airdropped to subscribers every month, the monthly memes report.
I love it. I love it. I love the experimentation, doing it with something kind of fun and silly. I love all of that. By the way, Grace from Unlonely says in the chat, our new cast out challenge is a team meme. So we're really going to need you to step up on this one.
Okay. Right. So we're playing this game. It's kind of like Crypto the Game, but for Farcaster. And Grace and I are on the same team. So if it's memes, then the pressure's on. Everyone's going to be looking to me.
Yeah, you better win this one.
I know. I will be disgraced. My honor will be taken if I can't win.
Yeah, or everyone in the memes channel is going to vote you off the island. I don't know if that's possible.
Well, no, it's true. That's actually it's more insidious than that. It's my own team would have to vote me off if I don't perform. Yeah.
Well, no pressure, but really all the pressure.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so last thing, do you have a can you not for us today?
Like just general can you not, or like specific to Hypersub, or
either one? It could be specific. Most people have been doing, kind of on topic for what we've been talking about in the conversation, but it can be anything.
Okay, I'll do 2 then. So if you're a creator in Hypersub, I would just say, can you not give up? Like keep going, keep building your audience, keep publishing work. Don't get discouraged. Just keep showing up. And I think over time it'll work. You just don't give up. People go, oh, Farcaster, you have this audience of Farcaster. I've been grinding on Farcaster, posting a bunch of times every day for over 2 years, like when people were making fun of me for doing it. So like, just keep going. The second thing outside of Hypersub, I would say, just can you not be a hater? Just don't be a hater. You know what I mean? Like win and help win. Don't worry about competitors. Don't worry about other people that are winning. Just do you and focus on like what you're putting out there in the world, regardless of what other people are doing. That's my advice. I get like whenever I see people like other founders, other people just kind of like quoting or just like being catty and bitchy, I'm just like, man, don't do that. You don't need to do that.
Those are both so wholesome. People in the chat love it as well. And what a great note to end on. I love it. And I mean, I will say too, like I really do think you live up to that based on, the limited interactions we've had so far. Like you really are, you were so willing to help with setting up the Rehash Hypersub and, even coming on this podcast and everything. Like overall, like the attitude and the vibes are just so positive. And I really appreciate that. So thank you. And you just letting people know you definitely live up to all the positivity you just sprayed.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Tell people where they can find you if they want to follow you personally, and then also where people can go to check out Hypersub.
Yep. So hypersub.xyz. I'm nonlinear.eth on Farcaster and _nonlinear on Twitter. Send me a DM. If you have questions about Hypersub, let me know. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. We'll include all those links in the show notes, as well as the link to the Rehash Hypersub, so you can all subscribe and check that out. Thanks so much, Jonny, for taking the time today. Thank you for all your help with getting us set up on Hypersub. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And we'll be back again next week with another episode of Rehash. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Rehash. Rehash is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Diana Chen. Rehash is also supported by our community of NFT holders who curate our guest lineup each season. To get involved, head over to our website at rehashweb3.xyz and collect this episode as an NFT. Anyone who collects an episode becomes part of the Rehash community and will be able to nominate guests for future seasons. To learn more about how to become a guest on the podcast, go to rehashweb3.xyz/podcast. And to learn more about sponsoring the podcast, go to rehashweb3.xyz/sponsor. Finally, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at rehashweb3 or on Warpcast and Lens at Rehash, and join our community on Telegram at t.me/rehashweb3. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.